Hey everyone, and welcome back to Be Like Christ for our 5-minute Bible study. Got a little bit of a different scene for you. I'm in a different location today. Have to film from this chair, and my laptop's down here, so if you catch me looking down, that's what I'm looking at. But if you want these free PDF handouts, as always, you can still get them on the website. There's a link down in the description. Today we're talking about Genesis chapter 41 in 5 minutes. Let's begin as we always do. When did the events of this chapter take place? Well, Joseph was 17 years old when he was sold into slavery by his brothers. That was approximately 1728 BC. Now, Genesis chapter 41 records the events that happened to Joseph when he was 30 years old. So that would be about 1715 BC. Our main character is Joseph, who we've been talking about for a little while now. He was the son of Jacob and Rachel, and as I mentioned, Joseph's brothers had sold him into slavery down in Egypt, and that's why our story takes place in Egypt. We're going to talk about Pharaoh, who is, of course, the king of Egypt, and then the chief cupbearer. This was Pharaoh's cupbearer who had previously spent some time with Joseph in prison, if you remember that story. And then our last two characters, Manasseh and Ephraim, they were the sons that were born to Joseph. In terms of our map, these events took place in Egypt, but again, we don't know a specific region or city where they took place. In our first section in this chapter, verses 1 through 8, we're going to talk about Pharaoh's dreams. So 2 years after the chief cupbearer and chief baker had their dreams that were interpreted by Joseph in prison, Pharaoh had some dreams, and he was really troubled by these dreams, so he called his wise men, his magicians, to him to interpret them, but they were unsuccessful, and this left Pharaoh very frustrated. In the biggest part of this chapter, verses 9 through 36, we're going to read about Joseph interpreting dreams for Pharaoh. So the chief cupbearer had his memory jogged by this situation, and he told Pharaoh how he had met a young Hebrew man who could interpret dreams when he was in prison. So Pharaoh summoned this Hebrew man to him. Pharaoh told Joseph that he heard that he could interpret dreams, and he wanted him to interpret his dreams. But Joseph told him that no, it wasn't his power that was interpreting the dreams. The interpretations were actually coming from God. Pharaoh recounted 2 dreams to Joseph. In the first one, 7 healthy cows came up out of the Nile River, followed by 7 skinny and ugly-looking cows. The 7 skinny cows ate the 7 healthy cows, but they remained just as skinny and ugly-looking as they were before. In Pharaoh's second dream, 7 healthy ears of grain grew from one stalk, but they were quickly followed by 7 ugly ears that were, quote, blighted by the east wind. And just like with the cows, the 7 ugly ears of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy ears. Joseph told Pharaoh that God had revealed the interpretation to him and that his 2 similar dreams had the same meaning. The 7 healthy cows and 7 healthy ears of grain represented 7 years of abundance, whereas the 7 ugly skinny cows and ugly ears of grain represented 7 years of famine. Egypt and the surrounding countries were going to experience 7 years of plenty and abundant harvest, but it was going to be followed by 7 years of really bad famine. Joseph told Pharaoh that what he should do is appoint a wise man to store up food during the 7 years of abundance. That way the land wouldn't starve when the 7 years of famine came along. So then in our next section, Pharaoh finds his wise man. Joseph is promoted in verses 37 through 46. Pharaoh decided that Joseph was the wise man that he needed for this job, and he appointed him the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. So he went from the prison to the palace. You've probably heard a sermon like that if you've sat in a church for any length of time. Joseph was given this promotion. He was also given a wife. Her name was Zapanath-Paneah, and he was 30 years old when this happened to him. Then in verses 47 through 52, we read about the 7 years of abundance. During the 7 years of plenty, Joseph got all of the people to store away some of the grain that they were getting from their abundant harvests. We're also told that in the last year before the famine, Joseph had 2 sons, and he named them Ephraim and Manasseh. And then in verses 53 through 57, the famine begins. So the abundance was over, the famine started, it was going to last 7 years, and we're told that all of the nations around Egypt came to Joseph to buy food because he was the only one who had it. So that is Genesis chapter 41. Now let's talk about our application. Notice how Joseph proceeded confidently into a task that required God to help him to succeed. When Pharaoh asked Joseph if he could interpret dreams, Joseph very confidently affirmed that God would give him the interpretation to Pharaoh's dream. He stated it positively, without qualifiers. He didn't say, well, maybe I can, maybe God will help me, maybe he won't help me. He didn't doubt that God would help him because he was returning the glory to God. Is our faith ambitious enough to undertake a task that necessitates God coming to help us? Or do we only undertake work that we are confident that our personal skill set can accomplish on its own? If we're banking on our personal skill set, we're never going to accomplish much. In the Bible, when we read about great things happening, it's always because it's God's hand who is behind the situation, empowering the person and the circumstances.